All right, a big question on the minds of many Alabama fans. Can the Alabama Crimson Tide make it into the 4-team playoff coming off a loss to Auburn in the Iron Bowl? I'm Lauren Sisler. This is Matt Scalici. And Matt, this scenario, there's a lot of things still left to play out. I know we got the championship games coming up, but still a lot of football and a lot of scenarios, things that can happen for this Alabama team to get into the playoffs. So we want to explain that to you, and it starts with the conference championships coming up. The 4 of the 5, we know the Pac-12 is pretty much out of it.
Right.
But what needs to happen ultimately for Alabama to get into this one?
Well, I think you can kind of set aside the ACC championship game. Whoever wins that one is going to make the playoffs. So what you've basically got is Alabama competing with the 3 other conference champions to get into the playoff. And we know the SEC champ is going to get in at this point.
So you pretty much mark those 2 off the list.
Yeah, I think where Alabama fans should be placing a lot of their hopes and dreams this weekend is on that Big 12 championship game and the Big 10 championship game. So in the Big 12, you've got a 1-loss Oklahoma team, probably as hot as any team in the country right now. What I think Alabama fans should be rooting for in that game is for an upset by TCU. TCU lost to Oklahoma earlier this season. They also have a loss to Iowa State. So I think winning that game would put a 2-loss Big 12 champion up against a 1-loss Alabama team that did not play for the SEC championship game. I think TCU certainly has a fairly impressive resume at this point, but they're not a huge brand name like Alabama is. I think that would be a potential opportunity for Alabama to sneak in over the Big 12 champ.
And then, of course, you go over to the Big 10 championship.
Yeah.
Ohio State, Wisconsin. Wisconsin hasn't lost a football game all season. Ohio State obviously has the loss to Oklahoma and the blowout to Iowa. So obviously, I think that's a big factor in this one as well.
Both losses for Ohio State were really not close. I think that helps Alabama if Ohio State were to win the Big Ten championship. I think also the fact that they've got we don't know how they tell us that injuries play a role in who gets into the playoffs. Those things are considered. But we don't really know what Ohio State's situation is at quarterback right now. That might factor into things. But an Ohio State win over Wisconsin, I think, knocks Wisconsin out of the discussion. They don't really have any real impressive wins up to this point.
Because you can't argue that Alabama goes in over a no-loss Wisconsin
team. No, definitely not.
That doesn't happen.
I think Alabama has to hope for Ohio State, their old buddy Urban Meyer, to win that game and put the committee in a position where they have to choose between an Alabama team that pretty narrowly lost to Auburn versus an Ohio State team with 2 really pretty ugly losses on their schedule. I think it would still be a tough decision, but I think Alabama would probably be in pretty good shape if it came down to that.
Okay, Matt, so when you look at the SEC championship game this weekend, Georgia versus Auburn, obviously Auburn coming off a big win over Georgia, beating the number 1 team then they beat the number 1 team, Alabama. So do you think that it plays in Alabama's favor to be rooting for Auburn in this football game?
Well, I don't think it makes that much of a difference. I think even if you told Alabama fans,
because I know that's something they probably don't want to do.
I don't think they would want to do it anyway. But
maybe it gives a little bit of an edge.
I don't think it makes that much of a difference. Ultimately, Auburn is going to be a top 10 team whether they win or lose against Georgia this weekend. They are considered a very hot, impressive team. Losing to Auburn in Jordan-Hare Stadium is nothing to be ashamed of or embarrassed of, especially losing by a relatively small margin. So I think no matter what, the committee is not going to knock Alabama for losing to Auburn. I think they're fine even if Auburn is a 3-loss team instead of a 2-loss team.
Okay. Final question. If Alabama does not, in fact, get into the 4-team playoff, which once again, a lot needs to still happen.
Yeah.
But if they aren't to get into that playoff, where do you see them landing in terms of the postseason?
There's a couple of different places they could go, but as a 1-loss team, they're probably in line almost certainly for a New Year's Six bowl. That would be one of the elite bowl games outside of the playoffs, and probably the Orange Bowl would be the top option, I think, for Alabama. That's a game that's probably going to end up getting either Alabama or the loser of the SEC championship game versus the loser of that ACC championship game. That could be a really attractive matchup for the Orange Bowl, for TV, certainly, to have an Alabama versus Miami or Clemson. I think that would be a pretty interesting matchup for Alabama. So, it's the worst case scenario for Alabama at this point, obviously, but I think either way, they're going to be in a big-time bowl game.
I can imagine all the Alabama fans as well as the Alabama football team will be at home anxiously waiting to see how things shake out. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it. And, of course, for all your news and analysis as we get ready for the postseason in college football here in 2017, you can visit us on AL.com.